Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Touching Bases podcast. Today we're going to be going over some, I wouldn't say realistic, but very much on the hot take area of free agents for the Mariners, which is, it's not going to happen. But if for some miracle it does happen, maybe we can look a little bit deeper and maybe at some stats that nobody else is talking about, maybe because there's a small percentage of it mattering, but it is something to look into and we're going to go over it. So let's do this.
This is locked in back to the field. Bellinger has tied this game.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Touching Bases podcast. And if you haven't already subscribed, welcome to the family. Please hit the subscribe button. That would really mean a lot to me. We are a growing channel, just started about a month and a half ago, and I've been a little bit sloughing on the videos the last couple weeks. I've been out of town, but I'm back. We're in the studio. Things are normal. We're progressing. I did notice that turns out my worst performing videos are the ones where they bleep out fuck, shit, cunt, and sex. Last one wasn't even a cuss word, but you know, I'll try and keep it clean from now on. I think that's really hurting my videos. Those are my least viewed, and it's only the ones where I say those things. So I gotta bleep all that now. Okay, first off, let's take a look at the projected 2024 lineup for the Mariners. Now, there's been a lot of skepticism and concerns as far as like third base and the duo with Luis Urias and Josh Rojas. Is that kind of like that duo going on there, where it's kind of like they mirror themselves in the opposite way? Does that make any sense? That doesn't really make any sense, does it? They're kind of opposites, I should say, because Rojas is really good defensively. He's a great glove. He did an amazing job last year at second base, sharing it with Caballero. But Luis Urias, besides his injury last year where he didn't play, when he was with the Brewers, he was an extremely good bat. He was a contact hitter. He had pop to his bat, so he had to get it over the wall. Where Josh Rojas, I think in a couple of years, if he develops right and works on his hitting, he could be there, but he's not there right now. So I think when the Mariners are up, it would be great to have Josh Rojas there as a defensive guy to really help out JP Crawford over there, because JP's getting a little bit on his older side. He's still good defensively. I don't want to take that away from him, but his range is probably the only thing that's holding him back. And having somebody at third base really to kind of help him cover and just get to the balls that maybe he can't, that's a very good asset. I'm not saying Luis Urias is bad defensively, but his bat is what shines in this whole entire duo thing. So just keep that in mind. The other aspect that everybody's a little bit concerned about would be first base with Ty France. Now that's a very controversial thing. I'm not going to shit on Ty France. I like him. I have his signed jersey. It's like me saying, oh, I'm not going to go there. Never mind. I do like him as a player, and I really think he is a good first baseman, but his bat on the second half of last year cooled off like ice cold. It got really bad, and that's not something the Mariners can really afford to have. First base is where you have someone who can dig balls, does not have to dive or do anything crazy defensively, but is a major good bat. When you have a first base, you think power, and that's what we need, and that's not exactly what Ty France has to offer right now. He's got pop, but it's not insanely good pop. It's like, I don't know, like shortstop pop. Good, but it's not what you're looking for at first base. The other thing would be outfield. Luke Raley was a good pickup. I think if he can perform like he did last year, it would be good to have him, especially in right field. But if he's not, then that's a total bust. He's good defensively out in right field, but his bat really needs to be alive. Left field, Mitch Haniger, good bat as long as he can perform like he did in 2022, which is what everybody's hoping for. But defensively, everybody's worried about that. I don't think anybody is going to expect him to play every single game in left field without having an injury. He has just been plagued with injuries, and being on the field every single day is very nerve-wracking for Mariner fans. Before we cover who might make sense for the Mariners to sign based on very specific T-Mobile Park ratings and then playing in Seattle, let's keep in mind that T-Mobile Park is the second behind a stadium that's only used, I believe, for spring training and specialty events. It's the second hardest park for batters in baseball. It has the lowest rating as far as batters' ability. So keep this in mind, because this is probably the reason why the Mariners have constantly failed to make it to the playoffs, and when they do, they don't really make it past the division series. And also, the stats I'm giving are from the last 2 years, just so they're relevant. I don't want to dig back too much farther than that, because players change, and honestly, I wanted enough information to kind of share with you guys, but also not give you irrelevant information, which some of you are probably going to think that it is irrelevant. just hang in there with me. So initially, I have 3 people that were available that I would love to see on the team, but they really absolutely make 0 sense at all. Whit Merrifield was number 1. Of course, a couple days ago, he signed with the Phillies, so forget about him. It's a little bit too late, although I did like him a lot. JD Martinez, probably a little bit out of our budget, pretty old, and not really anywhere to put him besides DH, and we already have Mitch Garver, so it doesn't really make any sense. Tommy Pham, we have no history of him playing at T-Mobile Park, so I just really couldn't report on him. Maybe he'll do good in Seattle. I'm not exactly sure. It'd be great to have an outfielder. Again, he is not exactly the best defensive outfielder. It was almost like him and Soler were kind of on the same grounds, but Soler had a little bit more pop and power. So who's left? Well, we can start off with Cody Bellinger, everybody wants to talk about. Can we afford him? Absolutely not. Would it be realistic? No. It's not worth giving up maybe 2 or 3 contracts in the next 3 years just to sign one player that had one good season in the last 4 seasons and take that risk. It just doesn't make any sense. Next up is a big name that everybody's been talking about, and I'm talking like everybody. It's all over Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Matt Chapman, third baseman, played for the Toronto Blue Jays, did not re-sign. Again, he's one of the, was it Barrows? I think it's Barrows. I'm sorry, I keep messing up his name because I don't like the guy. Crew that doesn't seem to want to sign with anybody until they get a crazy long extension or contract that gets obviously their agent paid. So yeah, he's been holding out and everybody's been thinking maybe there's been talks with the Mariners and Chapman. This is all rumor and it keeps going around and it's getting heavy to where MLB Trade Rumors is now putting out stuff. So if it's true, look at the positive side. This does open the door for us to do trades for first and for our maybe a 6-man rotation, because at that point, if you get Chapman and put him at third, you don't need a trifecta over at third base. Josh Rojas wouldn't make sense, and Luis Urias wouldn't make sense being there if you have Matt Chapman, especially his backups. And the Mariners are very much a pitching focused team, so they're going to rather have the slots on that opening day roster to be full of a bullpen and kind of the minimal that you really need for the bench. You don't want to be paying people that are just going to be sitting most of the games. So what would this lead to? Most likely a trade if someone's looking for a first baseman or looking for a third baseman and getting someone to maybe back up Ty France or maybe replace Ty France, or adding a 6-man rotation, just whatever budget that you can come up with. Or maybe they're just cutting budget. They would trade Luis Urias or Josh Rojas to cut budget and maybe bring in a mediocre or maybe a prospect first baseman that's going to be MLB ready. Keep in mind, Tyler Locklear should be MLB ready this year, but as far as last year goes, he was in AAA. So no idea what's going on there. Chapman last year hit a 233, 327, and a 430 with 315 batting average at T-Mobile Park when he did play. Keep in mind, this is only 5 games total this last season, so I'm taking an average based on what he did in those 5 games. It's a very minimal. I understand it's not exactly a sample size that's worth relying on, but this is the time that he did play in T-Mobile Park, which would be his new home he would play a lot at. So 315 batting average at T-Mobile Park in the last 2 years, let me correct myself, with a WRC plus of 106. Now, the WRC plus doesn't sound good, but again, these are 5 games total, and one of those games struck out 3 times out of 5 at bats, while the other times he was hitting over 500. So you take what you can get. I'm just throwing out all the numbers there. If you take out that one game, he had 157 WRC plus. See what I'm talking about? There's a pretty big difference when you have one bad game and a small sample size, so keep that in mind. If playing at T-Mobile Park, he would have hit 29 home runs last season based on all of his hits in the range of the fly balls, maybe ones that did make it or didn't make it depending on where he was. In T-Mobile Park, he would have had 29 home runs. Now, I like Chapman, but the money doesn't make sense. Of course, it's all that contract stuff. It's all the money things. I'm trying to keep this as who's the best option if money wasn't an issue, because it doesn't make any sense if we're maxing out all the spending money we have on one guy, and then even if we take deferments, the following years means we're going to have to cut people, and that doesn't exactly make the team any better. And it's definitely not a Jerry DiPoto kind of move, so I don't really want to dive too much into the muck of finances and salaries and all that stuff. Now, keep in mind, his consistency is not too bad as far as his offense. His glove is insanely good. It would be great defensively. It would be Josh Rojas and Luis Urias combined, and he would have the bat, and then you would also have the defense. But he does have back issues, a history of back issues, and he has had other injuries. He's getting up there in age, so there is much more risk spending a ton of money on this guy just to replace 2 other guys that are much younger and coming up. But again, you are getting somebody with really good range that can help Crawford out. who's at shortstop, and his range is a little bit depleted over the last couple of years. Another option is Gio Urshela. Now, I was pretty on board with this guy a while back, as thinking as somebody that we could bring on. This was before the Luis Urias trade that happened with Boston. He's still in the market, and he's still there. Now, he isn't going to be your go-to guy as far as, you know, a solid bat for third base. His bat was okay. He's a contact hitter. He didn't have a lot of power or pop. Honestly, at this point, I see him as maybe a little bit more contact than Luis Urias, but less pop than him, and then a little bit less of a defensive player than Josh Rojas. But it's one person, so you're not swapping them out all the time. I don't know what you guys would prefer, but personally, I would just stick with what we have instead of trying to pay more money for somebody and then create a three-man system of basically mediocre third base. Now, last year with the Angels, when he did come to town to play, his performance in Seattle, where he hit a 225 from the last 2 seasons, and with a WRC plus of only 66 combined in T-Mobile Park, he's not exactly the best as far as the park goes. These are small sample sizes. Maybe it would be a little bit different if it's his home stadium, but he did collectively hit 10 home runs at T-Mobile Park, which is okay. Again, he's not a star third baseman, but for really cheap, I think you could pick him up. Now, if you're willing to take him and then trade Josh Rojas and Luis Urias for maybe a first baseman or power bat outfielder, which I feel like we're doing a little bit too much outfielder signings, so it doesn't really make sense. But maybe a trade for someone to back up Ty France or to replace Ty France with those 2 third basemen, or just maybe Luis Urias and Ty France go somewhere to get a big bat first baseman. I don't know who would actually take that deal. My mind's just kind of racing on this. It doesn't really make, this is the top of my head. This is very off script, so I don't really know what would happen there, but he's an option, and he's you know, kind of a one-trick pony. You know, he's good defensively, and he's going to just get on base, but you don't expect a lot of power out of him. So, and he's going to be cheap, but still not one of my top picks. Last but not least, I have a guy that nobody's probably thinking about at this point. Now, I've really been honing in on third base and outfield, but to end it, I wanted to talk about Brandon Belt. Now, he spent most of his career with San Francisco Giants. Last year, he did 1 season with Toronto Blue Jays, and he did a pretty mediocre year. I wouldn't say mediocre. He did good. He did good for first baseman. And he's 35 years old, so he's definitely going towards the end of his career. But he would be a dang good fit for the M's. I mean, despite his overall stats, but just looking at how he performed in Seattle. So he's a first baseman and a DH, but he slashed a 254, a 369, and a 490. He's almost hitting 500 for his slugging percentage at 35, but he has an OPS of 859. Now, that's what he did last year. Now, at T-Mobile Park, since 2020, he's averaged a 227 batting average, and that's a grand total of 4 games that he's played. But he would have hit 19 home runs last season if he was in Seattle based on all the balls that he hit. But the key thing here that I wanted to bring up, this caught my attention. Now, I'm just saying, I know he did 19 last season, which actually matches with how many home runs he hit overall last season. So it's very much on par. But if you go back all the way, let's say it's except for last year in 2017, he would have hit more home runs in Seattle than what he actually hit in those years if he was playing for Seattle. Does that make sense? I don't know if that made sense. Let me try and explain that better. In 2016, he would have hit 24 home runs in Seattle. In 2018, he would have hit 18 home runs in Seattle. 2019, he would have hit 20 home runs. 2020, he would have hit 13. This is where it gets good. In 2021, if he was playing in Seattle, we should have picked him up back then, he would have hit 31 home runs if he was playing in T-Mobile Park. At the time, I guess that would have been Safeco Field, I believe. He would have hit 31 home runs. And then in 2022, he only hit 9 home runs. And that's when he got traded, where last year he would have hit the 19 home runs, which matches how many he actually hit on par. So that ballpark structure, he is actually very much favored, at least in his entire career versus anybody else that's a free agent, to hit a ton of home runs in T-Mobile Park. Are home runs everything? No. And I know what you're thinking. Stop talking about the home runs. It's not a big deal. We need someone who's going to get on base and have a high average. I get it. But 227 batting average based on the 4 games in the last 2 seasons that they've played at T-Mobile Park. I will take it if he's able to hit between, let's say, 15 and 35 home runs. That's kind of the range that we're looking at right now. And it's a small sample size, so it doesn't mean it's accurate by any means, but it's something to keep in mind. The fact that every single year, based on his hits, show that he is a powerhouse and he'd be successful in the park. And then also having that duo of Ty France and Brandon Belt together to kind of trade off, stay healthy, stay fresh, that could be a huge asset to the offense of this team. And first base doesn't require a lot of energy, so I think he'd be able to perform well first. So what do you think? Do you like any of these guys? I've chosen a couple and I left about 3 or 4 out because it just doesn't make sense, or one already got signed. If you haven't already subscribed and joined the channel, please do now. The button's down below. It's an easy click, doesn't cost you a thing, and you can join this family, this community. Hit the bell for notifications on the next video. And if you like arguing with people and you want to argue with me in the comments, I will respond and we can have fun that way. Sounds good? All right. See ya.